From the Fox News radio studios in New York City, giving you opinions and facts with a positive approach. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. Welcome to the latest moments of the Brian Kilmeade Show, 1-866-408-7669. So glad you're here. I'll tell you, if you're anywhere in the Northeast, even down like basically in the South, all the way down to even parts of Florida, it's freezing. I don't know how the heck that happened. It seemed like a balmy spring a couple of days ago, but now in Virginia, there's a lot of peril on the highways. There's a lot of people stuck on those highways. First big test for the governor there. But we have much more to discuss. We're going to go to Texas, talk to Lieutenant Colonel Allen West about his quest to be the next governor of Texas, and, of course, take your calls. So let's get to the big three.
Now, with the stories you need to know, it's Brian's Big Three.
Number 3.
Yes, rules changes are on the table. We're discussing them actively with the senators. And as I said in the Dear Colleague that I issued a while ago, we are going to vote on voting rights shortly, including considering rules changes.
Yeah, right. A radical, desperate Democratic agenda now out in full sight. Dems are going back to a social spending palooza, plan to blow up the filibuster, nationalize elections, while more lefty politicians retire and blue state residents are running to the red states.
Number 2.
Testing, contact tracing, and vaccination efforts by her administration have been an abject failure. The layers of mitigation that we need to keep our schools open and to keep our students inside of the school buildings have not happened here in Chicago.
Consensus is clear. Kids need to be back in school at any cost. The only ones now fighting this critical decision are not Democrats, not even radical lefties, but teachers' unions. I'll bring you the details.
Number 1.
I do think that there's a large waste going on, frankly, and the disparity between the screening tests for the actual virus versus screening for immunity is quite massive. I think we get a lot more bang for our buck if we were screening for immunity, actually, as opposed to the virus itself.
Thank you, Dr. Norchasm. Live with it. Any other attack on COVID-19 is a misguided, wrong-way street. Testing is not enough, and it's not accurate, and we don't have enough. The vaccine handles symptoms, not the virus. Isolation is psychologically destructive and not really productive. Cloth masks don't work. We just heard that from the experts. And by the way, the experts have no credibility. They contradict each other all the time, and the policymakers have consistently let us down. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. The masks don't work. This virus is not going to be a problem here. When we get the vaccine, there's not going to be any issues. 96% effective. That is not the case. It minimizes symptoms. More accurately is the case. This variant is not dangerous. They're pretending like it is. It's causing hospitalizations at a greater rate because people are running to the hospitals, we understand, because they can't get tests anywhere else or they feel a little queasy. You got a cold. Understood? You got a cold. So this is important. For now on, don't get caught. We're not doctors, and the doctors that are in the audience know who they are and know that they don't know everything. There's an expertise to being a doctor, general practitioner as opposed to epidemiologist, to a radiologist. We pretend that if every doctor knows everything, they don't. So having said that, learning to live with it. Get educated enough to go to that restaurant, go to the school, go to the game, live your life, go to the park, go to work. It's live with it. Mayor Eric Adams more than agrees. Cut one.
We need to really teach New Yorkers how to do this self-test at home so they can start gauging for themselves, because we have to live with COVID and modify our behavior, because another variant comes out. What are we going to do? We're going to shut down our city? We spent $11 trillion on COVID. We don't have another $11 trillion. It's time to live with COVID and build systems around COVID until it dissipates and leave us. Until then, the city has to operate, and I'm going to make sure of that.
Look, I never met that guy. But if the Democrats want a template, and Phil Levine, the Democratic mayor from Miami, who's a self-made millionaire, friends of Bill Clinton, he said if Democrats don't want to have an absolute disaster in the midterms and have a future, that's the future. So he's saying he's pro-business, he's pro-police officer, and he actually says live with this virus. I mean, he didn't talk like a Democrat. He talked about a guy in charge of the biggest city in the country. How to stop? We have to stop with the testing. If you feel terrible and you're worried about visiting your 88-year-old grandmother in a nursing home, go get tested. But if you feel like you got a cold, stay home if you have to. If you can't, try to learn virtually if you go to school. And then when you get over the cold, within 5 days, you go back to work. Don't wait online in 22-degree weather in order to get a test that shows you may or may not have it. We don't even know if the tests are going to be effective. We're going to get it back in time to reflect that. I like that Dr. Human Norkasm said last night about the virus. We're going about this all wrong. Cut 6.
These tests, unfortunately, are very volatile. And what I mean by that is that you can take a test 1 minute and then the next minute you can turn positive and acquire an infection from wherever you are. And so I think in general, it's a good idea to actually limit this to higher risk populations and people who actually are symptomatic so that we can actually quarantine people appropriately. I do think that there's a large waste going on, frankly, and the disparity between the screening tests for the actual virus versus screening for immunity is quite massive. I think we get a lot more bang for our buck if we were screening for immunity, actually, as opposed to the virus itself.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Hey, I feel like my immunity is pretty strong, and I have no problem going out to Fridays this weekend. All right? I feel my immunity is very strong. I had the virus. By the way, and a heart surgeon came up to me over the last week, and he said to me, he's not getting the vaccine. So that's interesting. I said, why? He's like, they don't know enough about it. It's not working. There's no proof that vaccinated or unvaccinated people spread the virus more or less. Number 2, he said, this Omicron is a blessing. I go, what do you mean? He said, it's going to spread throughout the population. For the most part, everyone will experience mild symptoms, and you'll have the antibodies. That's what it is. And that's what they tell us. These people that go to school on these viruses and these pandemics say they come back, they're easy to spread, they're not as virulent, not as pernicious. That's a fact. So that brings me to my next big talking point, and that's schools. Got to get back to schools. That is not a Republican opinion anymore. It's not Donald Trump's opinion anymore. It is Democrats' opinion. It's the Secretary of Education. It is Anthony Fauci, that the worst doctor America ever produced. Cannot wait for him to retire and stop booking him all other channels. No one listens to him. He's always wrong. He never says anything definitively. But we have to get the kids back in school. So the moderate Republican governor of Massachusetts pushing liberal Boston, get back to school. The liberal mayor of Chicago, you got to get back to school. The Secretary of Education, got to get back to school. The governor of Illinois, you got to get back to school. They're not going back to school. The mayor of New York City, not getting back to school. They're not going back to school because of the teachers' unions. And that is what's so unbelievable. And it's not so, forget about the daycare. That's a big deal, that parents can't go to work because they need daycare. Know what it's about? It's about these kids not meeting any new kids, about these kids not learning for a year and a half, first grade, 11th grade, 7th grade. It doesn't matter. The last 2 years have been a nightmare for these kids. The parents are thoroughly letting all of them down. Listen to some of these kids. They weighed in suburban Illinois. They find out Monday, they brave these single-digit temperatures to find out this. Cut 13.
I was mad.
Why?
I personally don't like being online. I wish we were in person. I feel like I learn better that way.
I'm not too happy about it. I feel like I have to work a little bit harder and pay attention a little bit more, because when you're doing remote learning, you kind of just, you could get easily distracted when you're at home, you're on your computer, you could zone out easily, but when you're in person, you're kind of more engaged.
At the very least, let alone the friends that you might see in the hall, how you learn to interact with older kids, younger kids, your teachers. Now we find out, and we have it, Eric, I forgot to ask for it, but from yesterday, Dr. Scott Gottlieb and the masks. Now you make the kid wear the mask in school all day. Now we find out that the masks are useless. We knew this. We hear it going back and forth, but they're useless. They do almost no good. So now you have these kids with a face almost entirely covered. And just watch. They're going to start investing in N95 masks. We gave these school districts billions of dollars. I mean, Trump always says that, billions upon billions. But they gave them $10 billion in March. In December, before Trump left, they put out another, I think, $1 trillion or $800 billion. A lot of it went to schools. And now you have these teachers' unions having these demands before they'll go back. But on the masks, talk about being let down. Listen.
Cloth masks aren't going to provide a lot of protection. That's the bottom line. This is an airborne illness. We now understand that. And a cloth mask is not going to protect you from a virus that spreads through airborne transmission. It could protect better through droplet transmission, something like the flu, but not something like this coronavirus.
I'm flawed. I should not be, but I'm absolutely floored when I saw that. So the Chicago School District is saying we want 300 new testing sites. Really? Chicago, before they went back, before the teachers go back. They also are asking for a KF94, KN95, or N95 mask for all staff and students. Do you know what it's like walking around with an N95 mask? You're basically breathing in a tent alone. I mean, I know first thing they told us, remember, you can't use N95 masks because surgeons use them because they got to be fitted. Oh, but we forgot about that. Principals have authority to move classes remote if COVID cases reported, so they are able to do that unilaterally. The Secretary of Education said do it. The mayors have said do it. But the teachers' unions are making outrageous demands that can't possibly be fulfilled in order to keep those kids out of school. It is sinful. Britt Hume, cut 15.
Well, I don't think the teachers' unions are going to have much public support this time around. I'm not sure how much they had the last time around when they were trying to keep from reopening schools. Those that are being kept closed or those that the unions are urging be kept closed. And it poses something of a danger for the administration, which seems now to have awakened to the fact that this is politically bad news. And you saw that in Miguel Cardona's remarks over the weekend, that they want to keep schools open. Good for them for saying that. But the whole atmosphere and the sense that this whole pandemic has been handled badly by the past president and now by this president, I think hangs over this administration and will continue to.
But I'd say this, and no doubt about it, the President Trump made some mistakes. We haven't had a pandemic to deal with in 100 years. So obviously nobody left that playbook around. They say there was a pandemic playbook around, but even that one, dusted off, used under Biden, has been a disaster. A lot of Trump's instincts were right. Too much testing, number one. And at first it's like, well, that's kind of dumb. But the more you think about it, is too much testing. These asymptomatic people that are destroying their lives in our economy, big businesses and small businesses, not going to pump gas, not going to be mechanics, not going to be teachers, not going to the airports, not flying planes, not flying in planes, all because they're asymptomatic, spreading a virus that is mild in its symptoms. And then what else did he say? Got to get back to school. We got to find a way to get back to school, okay? That is also what he said. He also said we're never going to totally get out of this virus. It's going to go away. He said that in the spring when it was clear it wasn't going to go away. He says the vaccine should not be mandated. He's 100% right. The mandates, although they increase the numbers, they also increase the tension in our country. They are gutting our military. In New York, they're cutting our medical workers. They've taken out 36 firefighters and cops. More are coming online. Unpaid leave. Holding on to their jobs. Think about this. The medical workers, the nurses that we need in our system are not allowed to work. And more states like California are doing the same exact thing. And teachers who get vaccinated are told to stay home. How many want to come into work? They're told if they're not vaccinated, they're going to go home. They told us the vaccine was 96% effective. Let's be honest. It is not. Number two, they said it's going to be harder to spread. There's no proof that if I'm vaccinated or not vaccinated, which I am vaccinated, that I'm going to be spreading more of the virus easier than a non-vaccinated person. Number three, which might be true, that if we're going to get the virus, the symptoms are going to be less. That's what you should have been saying. Now they're saying get a booster. In Israel, they're saying getting 4 shots. They're going to be saying 4 shots soon. This is not a vaccine. These are shots. We never say it's the flu vaccine because you got to get it every year. Now they're saying that our 2 shots don't hold up for 1 year. So forget about it. It's living with it. Evaluate the risks, see the symptoms, know your antibody level, or roughly know if you had it already. Live your life. Enough. Tell me how you feel about it. 1-866-408-7669. And then I'll take your call. I'll take your calls twice this hour because I want you to speak out. Tell me how your life's being ironed out. Because I'm telling you right now, when the Democrats fall epically in the midterms, it's going to be because of this virus. What Joe Biden promised, how he ridiculed the president, Trump, to get elected, and has fulfilled almost none of those promises, including the most egregious and irresponsible act, and that is not pushing for therapeutics, pre-ordering them while they were being tested, And therefore, when they do have something that works 90+%, if we're to believe those percentages, we don't have enough until the summer. That, to me, is virtual criminal. Back in a moment.
Coming to you on a need-to-know basis because, man, do you need to know. You're with Brian Kilmeade.
Fox Nation presents podcasts Women of the Bible Speak.
I'm Shannon Bream, host of Fox News at Night and author of the new book, Women of the Bible Speak, the wisdom of 16 women and their lessons for today. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, foxnewspodcast.com, or wherever you download your podcasts.
From his mouth to your ears, it's Brian Kilmeade.
Because if we don't change the rules, the Republicans will block this, and our democracy could be at risk and even wither in real ways.
Really? So Senator Schumer is letting everybody know he's been an abject failure as majority leader. He's been unable to convince and try to ramrod Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, and I imagine a couple other moderates that don't want to be out front for no reason to put together this radical agenda that doesn't reflect the economic stress on our system or the rise in inflation and our radical debt and how much we spent trillions of dollars on this pandemic, which is China's fault. So while the economy stops and starts, he wants to pile this on along with saying it's a crisis because Republicans are reining in some of the pandemic voting rules that were put on the books because nobody wanted to go out and vote. So they wanted to have an option to vote at home. Instead, he's saying it's an emergency voting rights legislation. Why? He's getting pressure from his left to do something. And on the right, they said, we're not going to federalize elections. Go ahead and win a state house. And then you could decide what you want these election rules to be if it passes that state house, if it passes your governor. But until that time, that's not the way our system works. Cut 19.
Yes, rules changes are on the table. We're discussing them actively with the senators. And as I said in the Dear Colleague that I issued a while ago, we are going to vote on voting rights shortly, including considering rules changes.
Unbelievable. Considering rules changes to the filibuster. Last time you changed the rules of the filibuster to get judges passed, you ended up having to eat 3 Republican Supreme Court justices on a simple majority vote. Now, if you're going to lose the Senate and you got all this talent on the right, and you're going to lose, if you lose the Senate, and it's not going to be easy to win the Senate for Republicans. I know that, but the House certainly will be stopped there. So if you're going to do all that, you're going to change these rules. Can anyone look around the corner and see what you'd be looking at? Senator Sinema is. Howard, listening on Coil in Omaha. Hey, Howard.
Hey, Brian, I'm here to tell you that there's a lot more going on still with this fight against COVID. I just got out of the hospital last night with having survived with a brutal double Pfizer breakthrough infection. I'm 65. The Omicron snowball fest, maybe I was not hit with a snowball. My lungs were breached. People need to be taking this seriously.
With the vaccine.
Yes, with the vaccine. People need to be taking this seriously, and they're not. They think, go home and tough it out like we used to do with the flu. That is going to get people killed. I had...
well, I'm glad you're okay, Howard, but I would say having a treatment at home to be able to treat it would be great, too. She wouldn't have to go to the hospital. And I don't think anyone's taking it lightly.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
A talk show that's real. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
We are as united and stronger than ever. That's why we're going to win back the majority, not by a little bit, but by a lot in these midterm elections. If President Trump taught us anything, he taught us that an America First agenda is a winning agenda for the Republican Party. The Republican Party made that pivot, and that's why we're more united than we've ever been in my lifetime, Laura. The Republican Party is stronger than it's ever been in my lifetime. You're going to see evidence of that in a big way on Election Day in November.
And that is Congressman Jim Banks. He's an emerging leader on the right and really feeling confident that the Republicans, maybe through nothing that they've done, but through with the Democrats, how they have led, are more optimistic than ever. They're going to just have a huge 2022. Could that indeed happen? We will see, because there are some indications now that not only are the Democrats down, they're losing the Hispanic vote. And also, if you look at Virginia, they lost a larger percentage of the black male vote in Virginia. When the African American community actually put Joe Biden over the top, even though the president got a larger slice of the black vote than Mitt Romney and John McCain. Let's bring in Colonel Allen West, who wants to be the next governor of Texas. Colonel, welcome back.
Hey, Brian, good to be with you, and Happy New Year.
No doubt about it. Do you share Congressman Banks' optimism?
Well, yeah, I do, because what you see, and if I could use kind of like a football metaphor, you see the Democrats fumbling, and they are throwing interceptions all over the field. But the thing is that you've got to be able to capitalize on that. You've got to put up touchdowns. You've got to score when you get into the red zone. So I think the most important thing for Republicans to be doing right now is to come out and say, this is what we're going to do. This is our contract with America, which is what Newt Gingrich did back some years ago after Bill Clinton's first midterm election. So they need to have a plan that they can start articulating right now. And you look at what the success in Virginia was, that all of a sudden education became a big issue. So Republicans need to be talking about education, which does benefit especially inner city kids who are relegated to failed public schools.
The governor of Texas came out and asked for federal help when it comes to COVID testing. Do you support that?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we could be doing right here on our own in Texas. And so going and begging to the federal government, which, I got some real concerns about how all of a sudden the monoclonal antibody infusion therapy treatments have been slowed down, been halted. We know that they put a kind of a kibosh on that in Florida. I think that this is something that the Biden administration, not just the incompetence, but also the punitive actions that they're taking, because they're trying to force people into one single solution when it comes to dealing with this COVID, being whatever variant that is out there.
Yeah, I guess right now, that seems to be the issue. At the same time, what is the state of the virus in Texas?
Well, I tell you, I'm on the road heading into our campaign office, and we're open. People are going back to work, and it doesn't seem to be a very mass casualty incident. We don't see the hospitalizations going up, and I think that people are learning how to deal with this themselves. But what is a concern, I had a friend who recently came down with the Omicron variant, and I recommended her for the monoclonal therapies, and she was told that she couldn't get it because it was running low and there was a shortage. So I think what we need to be doing at the state level, since Joe Biden said that the states need to take control, is start working with these private sector organizations and companies to make sure that we can have the supply of testing kits. We can have the supplies when it comes to the therapies that are necessary out there in our respective states.
Here's what Governor Ron DeSantis said about that very issue, and it is not good. Cut 3.
When we were in the pinch, I bought some myself. None of the governors now are able to do that because the feds have seized control. So we're in a situation where we've now asked for 40,000 more every week because I have people that I could help, and they are holding on to it, and they're not distributing it the way we need it to be distributed.
So the government has hoarded remedies and therapeutics? That sounds evil.
Well, that's what the nature of this is. This is about power and control. This is not about seeking what is best for the American people. It's about forcing them into one single option. And that is not a good thing to be. And so when we have these therapies, we have these protocols, we have these treatments out there, that's what the federal government, the Biden administration, should be promoting. And they should be advocating. They should be working with states to make sure that that is readily available to the citizens. But instead, it's all about one thing, and that's the jab that you have to get in your arm. And thank God that we had a judge yesterday rule in favor of Navy SEALs and some other Navy special operators to say that they could not be denied their religious exemption.
Yeah, we've also lost about 200 Marines. They say many more in reserves. How many more military men and women can we lose with this COVID mandate? And what a disgrace Secretary of Austin has turned out to be as he sits there with his face shield, a booster, 2 Pfizer shots, and COVID.
Yeah, absolutely right. And really undermines his support of this shot mandate when he is the Secretary of Defense. Those protocols, according to the Biden administration, and he still succumbed to this disease. So I think that we need to just get back to allowing people to make the best possible decisions for themselves instead of going down this path of power and control and really financially enabling big pharma.
I guess, and they're making a ton of money, but I just can't understand. The one thing that I think the administration understands is kids got to be back in school. I looked at the Secretary of Education. I even looked at Anthony Fauci. I see these mayors like Lightfoot, as lefty as it gets, cannot overcome the union's push to not be in schools and to not get these kids back in school, even though Republicans have been saying this all along. Here's Mayor Eric Adams, cut 11.
We are going to keep our schools open. In the school, less than 1% of children are infected. At home, over 15%. So I say to that parent, bring your child to school.
I mean, that's a sensible Democrat. He's trying to get through to these teachers. What's it going to take?
No, he's absolutely right. And I got to tell you, it kind of goes back to what Ronald Reagan did with the air traffic controllers when they decided to go on strike. Instead of allowing them to shut down an entire country in our air travel industry, Ronald Reagan just went out there and said, hey, you guys are fired, and we'll find people that will come in and take those jobs. And so the same thing should be said to the teachers and the teachers unions. Either you come to the schools, either you teach the children, or we'll get people that will teach the children.
Yeah, I guess so. How's the run for governor going?
It's going very well. We're about to hit the road tomorrow to get back out across Texas. And the end of this month, voter registration ends for the primary, and early voting will start the 14th of February. So we're about 42 days away from voting starting.
Right. So, we'll see. Governor's going to, you're trying to, the sitting governor's a Republican. You're going for that nomination and, of course, the ultimate victory. And without the endlessly sexy Matthew McConaughey standing in your way, I don't see who's stopping you.
Well, you know, this is about getting out there, and job number one is our border. What we saw happen on our border last year, 2.5 to 2.6 million apprehensions. That's unconscionable.
And there's 62%, they say, through Title 42 have been turned around, which are single men. Do you believe that?
Oh, easily. But the thing is that when we look at the unaccompanied minors that have come into this country, and the fact that January is Human Trafficking Month, we've got to solve this thing, Brian.
Well, at least you got to try. The current administration is not even trying. You build they have agreed to continue to build the wall. The Remain in Mexico policy, they're suing to get it unreinstated, and they're not doing anything to stop the illegal drugs. And they're dropping people now in Pennsylvania in the middle of the night on Christmas night. So they're doing Long Island. We know they're doing Florida. They got so much pressure on Florida, they're now pushing for the Democratic governor there and just dropping them in Pennsylvania in the middle of the night. These kids are now flooding classrooms. They might be great kids. They're just not the way you come here. Colonel, where do we go to contribute to your campaign?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. What's happened there in Wilkes-Barre and Scranton with these flights at night is unconscionable, and it's just wrong. You go to west4texas.com, west4texas.com.
All right, go get him. Colonel Allen West, always great to catch up with you.
My pleasure. Take care, Brian.
You got it. Marianne, listening to WOKV in Jacksonville. Hey, Marianne.
Hey, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
I'm 73 years old. I had COVID actually literally a year ago today, lasted all 24 hours. It was before the vaccine. I have not taken the vaccine. Of my 3 children, only one has done the vaccine. All of my grandchildren have been in school. One's in Florida. One family's in Florida. One's in North Carolina, and one's in Atlanta. They're all private or charter schools. So the interview you showed of the tape before of the doctor saying the test is as good as 5 minutes before you took it. And it's so true. That's why you see a cruise ship with everybody that's been vaccinated, and oh my gosh, it's on there. Well, so what? They had they had their test right before they left, but it's just not that valid. So I just and the other thing in Florida, you can go in any store, maskless, and I can honestly say nobody harasses anybody. They let you do your thing.
Right, because you have to live your life. And when it's time to go on vacation,
Exactly.
they go to Florida, everybody. So that's it. So about personally, it's about living with it. And we've been let down precipitously by every politician, so many doctors who are worried more about politics than they are actually getting us the right information. They never say they don't know. They just say, these are the new policies, live with it. You just watch. You know what's coming down next? You know that 5-day quarantine period? It's going to be 5 days, and you have to take a test. Even though we know the rapid tests aren't reliable, and the other test has remnants of the virus in your system for 14 days and beyond. So that means we'll never get out of it. So look out for that. That's going to be the Anthony Fauci push when the CDC already stepped up and made their policy. I'm not going to tolerate it. Hopefully you won't either. 1-866-408-7669. Thanks so much, Marianne, over in Jacksonville. Back in a moment.
It's Brian Kilmeade.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Download and listen to The One with Craig Gutfeld, the co-host of The Five, like you've never heard him before. You know him, you love him, you want to be like him. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
A radio show like no other. It's Brian Kilmeade.
If I had $1 for every lockdown politician who decided to escape to Florida over the last 2 years, I'd be a pretty doggone wealthy man, let me tell you. I mean, Congress people, mayors, governors, I mean, you name it, you're bashing us because we're not doing your draconian policies, and yet we're the first place you want to flee to basically to be able to enjoy life.
So here's the thing. Governor Ron DeSantis is not saying live or let live. He's saying, I'm going to get people vaccinated. I'm going to provide the testing I can possibly. I'm going to make it as convenient as possible. I'll communicate effectively. I'm going to get the kids back in school, and I'm going to let parents make their own decision. I'm going to let businesses make their own decision. But it doesn't mean I'm not pro-vaccination. He is. It doesn't mean that people aren't vaccinated in Florida. They are. It doesn't mean local people don't step forward and try to buck them. They do. There's a reason why you get elected. And every city in Florida is so dramatically different in so many cases. Miami, dramatically different from Jacksonville, for example. But he's allowing that to a degree. And if he doesn't like it, he sues. But they keep that in state. And every time there's a surge, they go at Governor Ron DeSantis like he's the only governor in America. And this is going to wave in, it's going to wave out, it's going to hit the Northwest. We've seen this movie now for almost 3 years. And he's 100% right. They're going after him because he was missing 1 day. And how embarrassing. It turns out that 1 day he's with his wife going through cancer treatments. Friday night, I saw pictures of him tossing the coin at a high school football championship game. Janine, listen on WLAD in Connecticut, And I'll tell you, Janine, I see that a whole bunch of your schools in Connecticut are closed right now. The kids got to go remote.
Yep, it's sad. Very sad.
I know. What's on your mind now?
Okay, I work in an assisted living in Brookfield, Connecticut, and we have to be tested every week. We do a spit test. I don't know exactly how that works, but we do a spit test every week. If somebody calls out and they have a headache or they're not feeling well, we have to stay out 3 days at least. If we have COVID, which I don't believe, I think it's just the common cold, we have to stay out at least 5 days. If we're coughing, we have to stay out 3 additional days until the cough goes away. If a resident goes out and is in the hospital, they have to quarantine. They have been quarantining for 14 days in their room. So they have their meals delivered. They can't have any friends in. Terrible. They can't go to activities. And it's just ridiculous because most of these people are perfectly fine. And I don't believe that all these people that have died in nursing homes have died of COVID. When we have people that are in their 80s, 90s, and we have several that are 100, when somebody dies and they're 100 years old, I don't think COVID killed them.
I agree, and you're seeing that. By the way, this is kind of interesting. Governor Hochul, the new governor of New York, She is now calling random New York State hospitals to say, listen, what's the deal with your waiting rooms? Like, how many people are being hospitalized with this Omicron or with COVID? And she found out something interesting. I want to get to the bottom of it. It's the first time I read this in the New York Post today. It turns out Hochul said that amid the surge in hospitalizations tied to the spread of Omicron, she was, quote, disappointed to see that at least a certain percentage are not related to being treated for COVID. She says she's been doing random calls and around to some of the hospital leaders just to touch base, to see what the numbers are. And it goes seeing the numbers from 20 to sometimes 50%, but we don't have clear data right now. It says beginning tomorrow, meaning today, we're going to be asking all hospitals to break out for us how many people are being hospitalized because of COVID symptoms and how many people just happen to be testing positive just while they're in there for other treatments. I did not know that. Of course, if you're being treated for a broken leg and you have to get tested and you get tested positive for COVID, it looks like you're being marked down as hospitalized for COVID. And this is a huge problem. I'm wondering how these hospitalizations happen because all you get is a cold, there's been no deaths, and all you get is a headache and a cold. Like, why are people getting hospitalized? I don't get it. Maybe that's the answer. Eric, who's on WDBO in Orlando. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Brian. Happy New Year. I'm from New Jersey. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan since 1972. I actually got playoffs fever, but being in Florida, I kind of like Tampa Bay too. And what would Coach Kilmeade or Commissioner Kilmeade do about Antonio Brown? Because he could be picked up by any other team for one game that's in the playoffs. I mean, what would you do?
Well, number one, no one's picking him up. Antonio Brown's got serious mental issues. He's a danger to people he dates and gets massages from. And now he's, for his team, he can't be counted on. He has mental problems, needs to be treated, but he could never play on my team again. No way.
With Fox News Podcasts Plus, you can enjoy all your favorite Fox News podcasts without commercials. Subscribe now at foxnewspodcasts.com.
Live from the Fox News radio studios in New York City, fresh off the set of Fox and Friends, it's America's receptive voice, Brian Kilmeade.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. It's the Brian Kilmeade Show, coming to you from New York, heard around the country, heard around the world. We have a lot to discuss this hour. We'll do a simulcast with the number one news show in Fox in business, and that's Varney and Company. And Jonathan Ward standing by, one of this nation's premier Chinese experts, to find out what's happening in this country, who seems more belligerent by the day, more suffocating to its own people, and more trying to imperialistic with their Belt and Road program. We'll discuss it all. But right now, let's get to the big three.
Now, with the stories you need to know, it's Brian's Big Three.
Number 3.
Yes, rules changes are on the table. We're discussing them actively with the senators. And as I said in the Dear Colleague that I issued a while ago, we are going to vote on voting rights shortly, including considering rules changes.
Is this unbelievable? He's thinking about blowing up the Senate because he can't pass anything with a slim majority. Radical, desperate Democratic agenda now out in full sight. Dems are going back to a social spending palooza. Their plan to blow up the filibuster. Nationalize elections on the table this January. The question is Sinema and Manchin going to cave? And if not, this is the most bluster I've seen outside of WWE pay-per-view in quite some time.
Number 2.
Testing, contact tracing, and vaccination efforts by her administration have been an abject failure. The layers of mitigation that we need to keep our schools open and to keep our students inside of the school buildings have not happened here in Chicago.
Stacey Davis Gates, blaming Mayor Lightfoot for the failure of schools in testing and mitigation, or using it as an excuse to keep kids out of school. Consensus is clear. Kids need to be back in school at any cost. The only ones now fighting this critical decision are teachers' unions, not the teachers themselves. I'll bring you the details.
Number 1.
I do think that there's a large waste going on, frankly, and the disparity between the screening tests for the actual virus versus screening for immunity is quite massive. I think we get a lot more bang for our buck if we were screening for immunity, actually, as opposed to the virus itself.
It also doesn't help that we don't have enough tests. Live with it. Any other attack plan on COVID-19 is misguided. It's going down a wrong way street. Testing is not good enough. It's not accurate. The vaccine handles symptoms, not the virus. Isolation is psychologically destructive. And cloth masks don't work. The experts have no credibility on this. That's a big story facing the world. The big story facing America and to a sober free world is China. That's why I want to bring in Jonathan Ward, author of China's Vision of Victory and the founder of the Atlas Organization, consultancy focused on the rise of China and India in the new geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific and U.S.-China global competition. Jonathan, what does great to see you. Just your perspective.
Happy New Year.
Same to you. With President Xi, is it going to be a happy New Year for the world as he gets more muscular by the day?
Well, we're going back to an old tradition here, which is the Cold War communist speech. Xi Jinping gives a New Year's speech every year. He's been doing this for a while. He'll often basically say, here's the road ahead for China. Here's what we've accomplished. Here's what we need to do. He just did that, of course, accompanied by a massive lights display in Beijing that was, an impressive demonstration of their technology advancements. But here we are with a dedicated rival. I mean, they plan to have a big year. I mean, this is going to be a year in which he goes ahead with his sort of lifetime term confirmation. And in the meantime, their power is ramping up. I mean, their economy is continuing to expand, even though you're starting to see structural weaknesses. Western companies are continuing to invest over there, and they're continuing to build a military that is closing the gap with the U.S. On any given day. So we have quite a serious strategic situation cut out for us.
See, what's interesting, because I get kind of mixed signals, Jonathan, because I hear they're cracking down on any type of free enterprise. They're arresting people that get too big. They're trying to stop things like extra help on weekends that give the rich an unfair advantage to others. So all that thing that wipes out ambition and drive and creativity, they seem to be doing. They're not paying the price for that?
Well, here's the issue: is that the sheer size of the Chinese economy is the issue for us. I mean, they're cracking down on entrepreneurialism. Yes, that kind of thing is true. I mean, it's sort of a political rebalancing of the economy, making sure that nothing is more powerful than the party, nothing can challenge the party. But at the same time, they're using all the advancements that have been built by the private sector to broaden their sort of general technical capabilities, and they're catching up to us in every way. I mean, you see that across AI, across quantum, you name it. I mean, they are making huge gains. They're ahead in certain things, and they're able to do that as an authoritarian society. So, if we believe that entrepreneurialism is the way forward, we forget that it's a 1.4 billion person nation in a giant market. Those are their main advantages. Having, doses of entrepreneurship in there is important, but at the end of the day, the state is able to do things at scale and make decisions at a speed that we can't always match. So that's how we're going to have to compete.
I saw a ridiculous.
It's going to be very hard.
I saw a ridiculous number that said that China's only lost about 4,500 people through this pandemic. That's not even possible. They're experiencing the Omicron variant. What's the truth? How much damage has been caused by this virus on the Chinese economy and country?
Well, I'm sure it's been very significant. So certainly the numbers that they're reporting, I don't think we, have any reason to believe any of that. But one thing that has happened is, as part of the supply chain, I mean, people have been importing more from China. So, as the world's de facto, manufacturing workshop before COVID-19, I mean, we're still buying from them, and apparently lots of sort of they look at it as the supply chains have tied even closer to China. That's not necessarily true in every sector, obviously, but their game plan is to tie the world closer, make them more reliant on China. And, we have to do the opposite. I mean, we have to pull back. We have to look for other places from which to buy goods, from which to manufacture goods. We have to secure our own supply chains. And really the tension there, it's about where our companies are investing, where America's largest companies and the multinationals, the Fortune 500s, which in many cases are continuing to invest and build into China. So that's really the nature of the tie there, is that if we continue to have private sector investment going into that country, we're not going to be able to meet supply chain goals and rebalance the global economy away from China, which is what we need to do. So in that sense, we have some serious issues.
How long are we going to tolerate this? I mean, J.P. Morgan Chase is trumpeting it. We see Dalio coming forward and saying they're just like a stricter parent. They're the same as us. They like to be stricter with their people. I mean, is it really the almighty profit? Don't people understand that this is a threat to our national security?
Well, I think Dalio is a special case, and I think it's worth paying more attention to him on your show, because this is a man who believes that China is going to be the dominant empire, and he says it's a great investment. He says that China's in an economic war with America, it's going to have military competitions with America, and that he wants to have bets on both horses in the race. These are his words, not mine. So there's one of America's leading financiers basically, advocating for China's rise. I mean, that kind of thing, I think, is really disturbing that could happen, right here in our country. And then in general in Wall Street, I think you have a lot of people that are just willing to look the other way and turn a blind eye on, what's known to be a genocide, what's known to be a massive military buildup, because they want to build their businesses there. They want to manage, the growing wealth of China. And that's our fundamental problem, Brian, is that, how can we provide our long-term security when our private sector and our finance sector are basically building and strengthening our enemy for the sake of their, business interests. I mean, that's the fundamental paradox in U.S.-China competition, is that we are still economically working with our adversary through our private sector.
And the most flamboyant example has to be the NBA, where you have, obviously, they have a problem with the race relations in our country. They're not shy about that. We remember what they painted on the courts. At the same time, they have no problem looking past the genocide and the oppression and the end of free speech and the limitations within China, because it's all about money. I mean, I'm all for free enterprise and capitalism, but I am just shocked that at no point nationalism and patriotism doesn't figure in. What do you think effective leadership could do to that? Anything?
Well, I think companies have to start standing up to China, period. I mean, there was a bit of that in the NBA with, I think, Adam Silver, at least at the beginning, did a good job of saying, look, we're not going to do what you say. But way too many companies are simply willing to roll over. Beijing is able to tell them this is what you have to do and say, and they're willing to do it because they've built large businesses there. So, how do we get out of that? I think a choice is becoming, clearer. I mean, because when companies do that in China, they're getting pushback in the U.S. So I think the more that that's true, the more that American society and American consumers and citizens are asking our companies, what are you doing? Where are your values? The better off we're going to be. But there needs to be some urgency on that. We can't let our major brands become basically just beholden to our primary adversary. I think that's the job of American citizens to say that that's not okay.
It would help some natural pushback on that, because Nike said we are basically a Chinese company, which is unbelievable. They don't seem to have paid a price on that at all, but they have said it. The other thing is phase one of the trade deal that Donald Trump had been pulled off on almost every area. They have not lived up to it. Much of it had to do with purchasing our products, and everything from manufacturing on down. They're between 20 and 62% off the margins that they promised. So the question is, does Joe Biden reinvigorate the tariffs that were lifted for phase one, or does he risk fracturing the relationship further? If not, the message it's going to be all hell's going to break loose afterwards. And if he does, he has to risk retribution and maybe reciprocal tariffs back at us.
Well, right. I mean, that's right. The phase one, I mean, they didn't live up to it. That's, I think, par for the course. I mean, it was good to get them into a contract that at least we could say, look, you've broken this, given that they were cheating in every possible way in the economic relationship before that. I mean, they cheat on the WTO and all of this. I mean, China is not here to play by the rules. China is here to make the rules. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that we have to understand. So holding them accountable is going to be very difficult without applying real pressure. And, a lot of this is going to have to be through U.S. economic, containment toolkits, investment bans, export controls. Keeping the tariffs in place, I think, is smart because it's forcing businesses to look at China slightly differently. I think there are different conversations in boardrooms now because of the tariffs, and people realize that China's not going to be the perfect export base for America. I think that kind of certainty is important so that businesses can start to strategize away from China. But we have to apply more economic pressure. I mean, we have to beat these guys. We're not here to negotiate. That's not what they're here to do. They're here to win. Xi Jinping's speech was entirely about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. We're marching ahead. It's been a big year. We've celebrated our centenaries. The future essentially belongs to us. So that's the game we're in, Brian. I mean, this is not a negotiation game. This is a game of win or lose, really.
You would think they'd be so embarrassed by the death and destruction they've inflicted on the world by their pandemic, who they still haven't been transparent about. How do you walk that off? How do you spin that? Do they not realize on every level that they're responsible for this carnage?
Brian, this is a country that killed 50 million of its own people in the 20th century and still has Mao Zedong on every, piece of currency. So they celebrate history's most, bloodiest dictator and believe that he was the originator of their cause. I mean, that's how the Communist Party thinks. And no, they're proud of what they've done with COVID. They continually talk about how it not only showed China's excellence and solidarity, but it also improved China's geopolitical position. So that's what we're dealing with. We need to get the picture. This is not a friend, not an ally, not a partner, not a business partner. It's a predator.
So Mike Pompeo, and by the way, we're talking to Jonathan Ward. He's author of China's Vision of Victory. We need to know the next step in our chief ally. Mike Pompeo was on with Sean Hannity last night or the night before. Here's what he said about what could be happening after the Olympics. Cut 26.
After the Olympics, my prediction is they will try their, quote, reunification with China. Am I wrong?
Sean, I think that's likely. It's absolutely the case. These are all connected as well. They're connected by the central thesis of an administration that's not prepared to defend the things that matter most to America, America's security. We demonstrated for 4 years how deterrence worked, right? Ronald Reagan knew peace through strength. We talked about America first and getting it right. We made clear to the Chinese we would impose real costs with them. I don't think Vladimir Putin would have behaved in the way he's behaving today, coercing Europe, coercing the West, having conversations with the President of the United States, walking away thinking, I think I'll send a few more troops to the Ukrainian border.
So, the Russia and China alliance is something else to talk about. But just real quick on that, are you concerned that they're going to do what Russia did after the Olympics? They went into Georgia. Are you concerned that China is going to do the same thing with Taiwan?
I think the stakes are much, much higher than it was for Russia to go into Georgia, and that was a much simpler in many ways military operation. I mean, here crossing the straits, actually taking over that island could be incredibly costly for China. I mean, Taiwan is got a sophisticated modern military and understands the stakes of the situation. So, and increasingly the neighborhood, Japan, America, Australia, everybody understands what this means. So I think there's a very different awareness of what's going on in Asia. So hopefully we can maintain deterrence. I mean, that's obviously going to be the focal point of U.S. military strategy in the decade ahead, is trying to secure and defend Asia from Beijing's aggression. And on the other hand, right now we also have Putin on the Ukraine border. So I think what's happening here is the Russia-China relationship, which many people said would never happen. He's actually supposed to do a PhD on the Sino-Soviet split at Oxford. So I have a different perspective on that. I mean, they have a deep relationship, and it's maturing in the sense that they're able to sort of play a two-theater geopolitical game against the United States. So to have Putin doing what he's doing in Ukraine while China does, what it's, potentially preparing to do in the island chains is I'm sure there's some coordination to that we need to start appreciating. Because what would obviously really be dangerous is for the two to keep us distracted. But I think for now, there's always the possibility that China could act on Taiwan, and there's always the fact that it would likely be very costly for them.
Jonathan, I could talk to you for another hour and still won't get all my questions out, but I can't thank you enough for moving this story forward. Jonathan Ward, appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
You got it. That's excellent. We got to keep guys like him on the show to tell us what's happening next. This is our chief enemy. It's easy to get caught up in the pandemic and testing, but this is a real threat to America. Brian Kilmeade Show.
Expanding your knowledge base. It's Brian Kilmeade.
It's the Hammer Time Podcast. Fox News Channel's Bill Hemmer takes you one-on-one with engaging personalities covering the critical issues of the day. Find Hammer Time now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. America's listening to Fox News.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Hey, Doc, you listen on WOKV over in Florida, of course, over in Jacksonville. Hey, Doc, what's on your mind?
Man, I want to know what happened to the HIPAA. I mean, why do you have to have all these passports? Doesn't HIPAA say you don't have to tell the world what's going on with your medical history?
I thought so, too.
I thought doctors took the Hippocratic oath to do no harm. I mean, Dr. Fauci is flip-flopping, and it seems like he's the person that needs to be on trial. And the last thing, notice a lot of people who are calling in who are worried about people dying. Those are the ones who have been vaccinated. They're the ones talking about people dying. You should be protected. What's going on, guys? Thank you, Brian. I love you, brother.
Doc, that's what I mean. You got to live with it. I'm not just saying that science has to be perfect in a year. But they told us one thing about the vaccine, 96%, 94% effective, 89% for Johnson & Johnson. That's not the case. Not close. I know we can't predict every variant, but even on the first one, it's not close. So we understand maybe perhaps science indicates that the symptoms are less. I'll give you that. But we're not going to keep getting shots pretending it's a vaccine that's going to keep us out of this when you don't even factor in natural immunity and you're not even efforting to get therapeutics into everybody's house. Instead, you get tests that you even say aren't 100% accurate or will detect the virus weeks after you've actually left the virus.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.
If you're interested in it, Brian's talking about it. You're with Brian Kilmeade.
I wished our mayor would listen to the Surgeon General and plan for all contingencies, meaning that testing, contact tracing, and vaccination efforts by her administration have been an abject failure. Only 30% of our elementary school students are vaccinated. Only 50% of our high school students are vaccinated. Added to that, we've had the worst debacle with respect to testing that the district has seen in December. So the layers of mitigation that we need to keep our schools open and to keep our students inside of the school buildings have not happened here in Chicago.
Number one, can anybody take responsibility, period? We watched the governor be able to, and by the way, that was as a superintendent complaining that the schools aren't ready to handle this virus. Number one, you have to take, at one point, you got to take control yourself. You can't keep waiting for Joe Biden to wipe your nose. You got the money, you put the pressure, you get the press, you talk about where that money should go, you find out a way to get a councilman and alderman to get that money to your school, take the picture, send it out, you activate your PTA and take action instead of just saying, it's been a year. It's been a year. You had $10 billion coming your way. It pours into Chicago because that governor's got so much power with this president. Believe me, Chicago especially. It's certainly not going to your anti-gang unit, or it's going to your pro-gang unit because that seems to be growing rapidly. So now you say you don't have the mitigation. I assume that means plexiglass and spread. 3 feet, plexiglass, not useful. Masks don't work. What else do you want? You want to expand your lunchroom, add a dormer, get the kids back in school. Robert, listen on WABC in New York. Hey, Robert.
Hello.
What's on your mind?
Oh, I spoke with you a minute ago.
Oh, you're on the air, Robert. You're on the air.
Ago.
You're on the air.
Okay. Who am I speaking with?
All right, we got to go. If you should know the show you called. That's the only prerequisite. That and sobriety we prefer. It's not CNN on New Year's Eve. I don't think either thing is happening. I don't think he knows what shows he called. Who am I? Just spoke to you. Does he just randomly call shows? Is he trying to be the 40th caller and win a new car? I'm not really sure. But what I would love to hear is somebody take responsibility. I mean, for example, what's happening in Pennsylvania. They have a Democratic governor, so they're now flying these illegal aliens into their state. In Florida, it's a different story. When it was happening, you know what he was going to do? He is going to pick up the kids and fly them over to Delaware. And he's threatening to the point where these illegal alien children coming here illegally, circumventing the system, clogging up school systems that our taxpayers have paid for, are not, for the most part, are not going to Jacksonville anymore to a high number. They're going to Pennsylvania. And when he wants monoclonal antibodies, you have Governor DeSantis actually going to make the purchase. He's taking action. Here he is last night talking about how the government is going out of his way to hurt him. Cut to.
Well, I think with the monoclonals, that is absolutely leading to people dying, because we saw when we put in our sites this summer in Florida to deal with the Delta wave, we kept tens of thousands of people out of the hospital. We saved thousands of lives by providing that treatment. So that should have been replicated in all these other states. But instead, what Biden and his cronies have done, they've seized control of all the monoclonal antibodies.
And that's criminal. Dr. Mehmet Oz, in my opinion, we got to get him on this week. I don't think it'll be hard. He wants to be the next Pennsylvania senator, and we have a ton of Pennsylvania stations, and you guys are so loyal to us. We appreciate it. But Dr. Oz, the first time I think that he felt the politics that got involved in medicine was hydroxychloroquine, when he said that there's indications that it's going to help certain people if you get to it early. And the way he was vilified and crucified through the media, he thought, what's going on here? Now he's got his syndicator being threatened, not going on Fox. And he thought, what's going on? How has politics got into medicine? He weighed in last night on this whole idea of treatment. See, everyone goes, I go to the hospital. I don't know what happens when you go to the hospital. You wait for it to get worse. You go on a ventilator. I don't know. You get oxygen. Cut 7.
Let's take the one from Pfizer. This medication in clinical trials reduced the chances of major complications and death by 90%. Where are the pills? To the best of my ability, I've looked everywhere. You can't find them. And I don't know who's able to get them. Forget about individual cities in a panic moves making rules that are inconsistent for the public. But as an average doctor, you're just trying to help your patients. We don't have scenarios where we only rely on prevention. I might prescribe you a cholesterol medication in order to reduce the chance of having a heart attack. But just in case you have a heart attack, I know how to do heart surgery. That's my day job, right? I'm a heart surgeon. We can't give up treatment and just trust that prevention works for everybody. We've learned that the hard way with COVID.
And I just don't understand it. And what's interesting is Senator Schumer came out and said, I want some of those treatments and monoclonal antibodies for New York. One thing he's pretty good at is getting things for New York. I'm in New York. Technically, in some ways, I benefit, but that's not really fair because you're majority leader to give it to one state in particular. But it happens. Look what Harry Reid did for Nevada. So Dr. Mehmet Oz has seen that. Now he gets involved, and I give him credit for that, and I look forward to having him on. So there's a couple of things. I just think the main theme of this show today, and I think it's going to be of 2022, is taking personal responsibility. And hearing that school superintendent speak out and say they haven't done any of these things. At one point, the one thing about teachers, when the budget is tight, they pull money, they find a way with a salary that's way too little to find a way to put it, to get the bulletin boards done, to get that kid who can't get school supplies, get them school supplies. They figure out a way, whether it's school drives or cake sales. I get it. So if you tell a school, hey, guys, this grammar school is we don't have the things necessary to make sure our teachers are as safe as possible, and we got to find a way to get that money, lobby it out. Who do we know in the media that could get that word out? Local media, national media. We would certainly put you behind this microphone, also give you a chance to go on television. This is the money that should be coming to an inner city school. My goodness, you start denying inner city schools in today's environment, you are done with politics, period. And believe me, there's a lot of Republican aldermen in Illinois who are frustrated, would have gone to bat for you. Instead, you go, we're not ready. Keep the school closed, keep the kids on Zoom, and keep my teachers happy. It's terrible. Absolutely awful. So a couple of things. We cannot count on cloth masks. We've first heard that. The vaccine does not prevent the virus. It may mitigate the symptoms. I assume. I haven't seen that, but let's assume. Can't judge on cases. Enough looking at the rise in cases. I got a runny nose. I don't want to be counted, all right? The cases are throwing people off. The question is, what is the severity of it? What are the deaths? Still down 4%, even though cases were up over 200% over the last 2 weeks. Hospitalizations are up 30%. But now we're seeing these stories that people are going in for other things, getting tested for COVID to see how they should be treated or where they should be placed. It turns out they have it. So you could have a broken arm, test positive for COVID, be asymptomatic, and now you're in there for COVID. And that's what the Democratic governor of New York is discovering. How many of those are off? Now, the mandates are killing job performance, and cities. I'm looking at some of these numbers, and I got the numbers. I'll share it with you when we come back after I do the simulcast with Varney and Company, which is coming up right after this. I'm looking at some of these numbers of the teachers that have been laid off, the medical workers that are told to go home and not get paid, the cops. Right now, there's about 3 dozen of them, and firefighters going to get even worse, let alone the thousands that have it and have to stay out the 10 days instead of the 5 days. Hopefully, they'll do the 5 days. And I'm telling you right now, the mandates are doing much more harm than good. Don't tell me the numbers have increased because of the mandates. It creates so much anger and resentment. It is not worth it. Let people make their own decisions. This is America. And where are the treatments, as we just discussed? Herd immunity, we never hear about it. Testing, the testing quality is also down. We're hearing listen to Anthony Fauci yesterday. Do we have that, Eric? Anthony Fauci yesterday talking about the good of testing. They're saying, wait, the PCR test might not be good. And the rapid test, we need a collection of rapid tests more than just one. So when you hear about that, I'm wondering, even if I can get a test, can I count on that test? What have I described? Question mark after question mark. And these aren't because I have this deep medical background where I'm still looking at some of the nuances of a study. This is what people are saying publicly. So I'm lucky enough to get a tester. I walked into CVS and miraculously, I got there just on time. I just got one.
There has been some concern about why we don't ask people at that 5-day period to get tested. That is something that is now under consideration. The CDC is very well aware that there has been some pushback about that. Looking at it again, there may be an option in that testing could be a part of that. And I think we're going to be hearing more about that in the next day or so from the CDC.
So this guy is going to make you test afterwards, where earlier in the interview, he was saying that, you need maybe 3 rapid tests to get an understanding if you still have it. And a PCR test admitted that you're still going to have traces of the PCR test days and maybe weeks after you're actually negative and not transmutable. When the CDC said within 5 days, you're 95% not transmutable, get back to work, wear a mask. Oh, yeah, the mask. The cloth one doesn't really work. Done. Live with it.
Living the Bream is a podcast hosted by Fox News Channel's Shannon Bream, sharing inspirational stories, personal anecdotes, and an insider's perspective on actions and rulings from the High Court. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. America's listening to Fox News.
Now, the Brian Kilmeade Show joins Fox Business's Varney and Company with Stuart Varney, live on your radio and on Fox Business. Here's Brian Kilmeade.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. In a matter of moments, going to be on with Stuart Varney. It's always great. I have not done it in 2022 yet, but it's one of the highlights of being on the show. I share you guys with his audience on FBN, Fox Business Network, and then you, of course, you become part of them. So we share audiences. Nationwide audiences, global audiences. So let's listen to Stuart.
10:51 Eastern Time. You know what that means? Brian Kilmeade joins me. Brian, you're on. Watch out. A new poll, Brian, shows President Biden's disapproval rating hit a new high of 56% in December, and 60% say they disapprove of Biden's handling of the economy. Okay, how does he come back from that? Suppose that we are close to peak COVID, that we can see the other side. That would be good news for the president, wouldn't it?
Oh, it'd be great news for the president, but it would be, if everyone's pretty clear, it would have nothing to do with what he's done. If you think about it, his big epic fail was his biggest plus. He promised things to get elected, and he didn't get close to achieving it. In fact, he teased us. He told us in July this was over. He had a CDC director said, once you get vaccinated, you don't wear a mask. You realize that most people, including our Secretary of Defense, wearing a mask, double vaccinated with a booster, now testing positive. So the vaccines have not worked out like he claimed they would and was taking credit for it until recently. He's giving Donald Trump credit for it. Now he's saying go back to school, but for a year he didn't. Now we're in total disarray when it comes to mandates. They're in courts to do it. And then when you look at what's happening with the economy, a lot of this is him. And he's looking now to get more grants to now meat workers and smaller farms. Where are we getting that money from? And he's still pushing the Build Back Better plan while jamming down trying to jam that down our throats. His only answer to everything is spending and vilifying. I think the American people are too smart for that.
You don't think he's going to make a comeback by the time the midterms arrive?
If he goes 1-800-JOE Manchin, I'll take your agenda, or does some of the things that Eric Adams is doing on crime and saying things like, I love this country, like he said yesterday on Sunday, and I believe the city's going to come back, but we got to live with this virus. He said, no one of his quotes was, Stuart, he must have gotten it from your teleprompter. It said, he said, we've spent $12 trillion and we haven't beaten this virus. We don't have another $12 trillion. We have to learn to live with it. If that becomes Joe Biden and he sounds more like Joe Manchin, that's a Clinton-like pivot that got Clinton a big re-election win.
But I don't think he's going to do it. Let me move on from there. I don't think he's going to do that. The University of Memphis is reportedly offering faculty members $3,000 to infuse diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice into their curricula. What do you make of that?
This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. What are you talking about, math? What are you talking about, gym? Are you talking about sociology courses, psychology courses? What does that have to do with it? I mean, to me, I could not be more disappointed. I'm in a pretty red state at a institution many people thought was somewhat conservative, and then you find out again the same thing that we've been seeing over and over again, infusing into other universities, that is bleeding into Texas, and now gender equity, about equity overall, or reparations and things like this that are detrimental to our country, further divide us, but now part of the things that'll be on the Blue Book exam or the test, and now that we have professors getting incentivized to do it. For $3,000, you got to go do something you clearly are reluctant to do, or else you wouldn't need money to do it.
Yeah, they'll pay you $3,000 to be woke and teach physics.
Right.
What nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Out of time, though, Brian. Sorry about that, but you're good again today. Gotta say it. Gotta say it.
Go get him, Stuart.
I see you all over television constantly. Do you ever sleep?
Oh, yeah, well, there's a good part to sleeping. I had a week off, and now it's time to stop sleeping and start working. And get
Well
to
said.
work.
Yeah, and get to work.
Right.
Well said.
You're the same way.
Yeah, I am. See you soon, Brian. Thanks
All
a
right,
lot.
you got it. 1-866-408-7669. What did I promise to do when we get back? I forgot. See, that's the problem with not sleeping. I promised to do something right after the Stuart Varney problem. Eric, you have headsets on, Eric. You had to be listening to me. Pete, nothing. Oh, yeah, we did play. We did play with Fauci. We're talking about the test not being effective. So we're sitting there lining up for tests. I read the saddest thing. It turns out if you want to fly internationally, you got to get a test. So it turns out at LaGuardia Airport, outdoors, they were testing to get that clean test in order to get on a plane. So you see families sitting out there. Right now it's 22 degrees in New York. Yesterday it was just as cold. And they were waiting out in a line outside. And then by the time they finally got there, they had missed their flight. They had to get their test and then go back inside and then wait for another flight, which if you look at some of the stats, they are so delayed because everyone's having the same problem getting pilots, flight attendants, crew workers, and planes up in the air. So in order to get a test to get on a flight to go, that's what's going on here. You just watch. Within this show, perhaps, there's going to be an announcement from the CDC calling for an amendment to what they said. After 5 days, get back to work after a positive test without a negative test. Now you watch, they're going to have a negative test. Do you know what that's going to do to the lines in the pup tents? Those pup tent lines we see outdoors in the Northeast are absolutely endurance tests and cruel. To sit outside and wait for a test you're not going to get back, for a PCR test you're not going to get back for a few days. If you're going to get it, now we question the accuracy of it. So that's what's happening. And I blame the public to a degree because we've been so terrified, not me, but so terrified by what they're saying about this virus. People are saying, I don't want someone walking past me who was positive 5 days before as I walk in the Gap to get another pair of jeans that hug me just right. And all of a sudden I realize these people are coming by me and they didn't get a negative test before they went out again. Or we went for the longest time. I don't want to sit in a restaurant with someone that doesn't have a vaccination card. How dare you? Now we find out a vaccination card really doesn't do much because a vaccine mutes the symptoms. It doesn't stop the virus for the most part. Unbelievable how we've been let down. Thanks for listening to the Brian Kilmeade Show. Go to BrianKilmeade.com. You can still get the President and Freedom Fighter and get it personalized. Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, and then a battle to save America's soul.
New from the Fox News Podcasts Network.
My name is Kennedy, and welcome to my podcast, which will, I humbly say, single-handedly save the world. You're welcome.
It's Kennedy Saves the World. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Live from the Fox News radio studios in New York City, fresh off the set of Fox and Friends, it's America's receptive voice, Brian
Thanks so much for
Kilmeade.
listening, everybody. It's the Brian Kilmeade Show, coming to you from New York. Heard around the country, heard around the world. Thanks so much for being with us. Now our second show of 2022. This hour, we're going to be joined by a man who kind of nervous. The Supreme Court's taking up his case as he is taking the fight for me and everybody else, pushing not for everybody else, but for people who think that mandates are wrong, un-American, and the president had no right doing it, especially to private businesses, ruining lives and careers and maybe health. So he is getting the Supreme Court doing an emergency session. The Attorney General of Arizona will be with us. Not only that, well, I'll talk to him about running for Senate. And Mark Kelly has been one of the biggest disappointments in the Senate. I thought he might be moderate. I know he's got that military background, astronaut, his wife, the tragic shooting. I thought this guy might represent a true purple state that used to be red. Instead, he's been invisible, letting Kristen Sinema takes all the slings and arrows. So I want to talk about Branovich about that. Mark Thiessen standing by. So let's get to the big three.
Now with the stories you need to know, it's Brian's Big Three.
Number 3.
Yes, rules changes are on the table. We're discussing them actively with the senators. And as I said in the Dear Colleague that I issued a while ago, we are going to vote on voting rights shortly, including considering rules changes.
Unbelievable. He's looking to blow the whole thing up. Radical, desperate Dems agenda now out in full sight. Dems are going to go back to social spending palooza, plan to blow up the filibuster, nationalize elections. I don't know if they have the votes, but the fact that they're still trying to do it shows how desperate they are and how anti-American behavior this is.
Number 2.
Testing, contact tracing, and vaccination efforts by her administration have been an abject failure. The layers of mitigation that we need to keep our schools open and to keep our students inside of the school buildings have not happened here in Chicago.
Stacey Davis Gates weighing in saying we don't have enough mitigation experts. Get back to school. 1% of transmission happens in school. The rest happens outside of school. Consensus is clear. Kids need to be back. Even left-wing mayors like Lightfoot say the same thing. Only the unions are stopping it.
Number 1.
I do think that there's a large waste going on, frankly, and the disparity between the screening tests for the actual virus versus screening for immunity is quite massive. I think we get a lot more bang for our buck if we were screening for immunity, actually, as opposed to the virus itself.
Live with it. Any other attack plan on COVID-19 is misguided and it's a wrong-way street. Testing is not enough and it's not accurate. The vaccines handle symptoms, not the virus. Isolation is psychologically damaging and cloth masks don't work. The experts have no credibility. I'm done. What about Mark Thiessen, former presidential speechwriter, Washington Post columnist, fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and Fox News contributor. Mark, welcome back. How do you feel about it's got to be let's live with it in 2022?
We've got to live with it. I mean, COVID's never going away, ever. This isn't going to be. It's not a pandemic anymore. It's endemic, and we've got to stop acting like every case is a tragedy. You know, Marty McCary points out that if you go out and test college students, right, and you test them not for COVID but for meningococcus, which is the bacteria that causes meningitis, which is a really serious illness, you'd find it in the noses of about 10% of college students. But only about 50 people get it a year. So are we going to isolate every college student who has the meningococcus bacteria in their nose? No, it's living there. And the reality is students and younger people are not in danger from this virus. Germany, here's a fascinating fact. Germany reported that in 15 months, not a single healthy child under 18 has died of COVID in the country of Germany. You know how many it is in the United States? We don't know because the CDC doesn't know because they don't track it. They literally cannot tell you. Rochelle Walensky was asked at a congressional hearing for the number of Americans. She said, I can't tell you. So they don't even know.
Or they don't want to.
They don't even know the answer.
Yeah, so now we're going to have the big pushback. Just watch for this, Mark. We saw it on Sunday. The CDC director came out and said after 5 days, you should be able to go back to work. You don't need a negative test. Anthony Fauci says, I'm not really happy about that. We're revisiting that. You watch. They're going to demand a test for Mark Thiessen to go back to the Washington Post newsroom to write his column. He's going to need a negative test if you tested positive 5 days prior, despite the minor symptoms. Even though transmission is down 90 to 95%, the CDC took that into account. And now there's pushback from cowering American citizens and the medical establishment led by Anthony Fauci.
First of all, I mean, look, if I have the flu, I'm not going to go into work for a few days because I'm a smart person. I want to get my colleagues sick. I'm going to work from home, right? We all do. Americans can manage this on their own. We've been doing it for years, right? If I have a cold, if I have the sniffles and I'm coughing, I don't go into work because I don't want to get other people sick. But I don't need the CDC telling me how many days and it needs to be and all the rest of that, and not based on any science at all either. And the reality is, look, we're going to have to learn to live with this. Think about the layers of protection we have. We have vaccines, which are hugely effective, right? Then we've got all these new treatments. We've got the Merck pill. We've got the Pfizer pill. We have the monoclonal antibody treatments. We have now Marty McCary has been talking about fluvoxamine, which is this prescription that's available, readily available, 91% reduction in death. We've got so many layers of protection for this. On top of that, for younger people, Israeli population study, it published in the New England Journal of Medicine this month, the risk of COVID death in people under 30 with 2 vaccine shots, 0. So we're not talking about something. The vaccines and the treatments have taken this from something that in March of 2020 was a mortal threat to something that is a little more serious than a cold. We've got to learn to live with a cold.
That's absolutely true. But the last 3 things, to be totally accurate, we cannot get the monoclonal antibodies. The federal government has hoarded it, and the states are not getting it. Number 2, they didn't make enough Merck pills, and they didn't make enough Pfizer pills.
Where was the Operation Warp Speed for treatment?
It's invisible. Where are they for testing?
He passed his first act as president, $1.9 trillion supposedly for COVID. Almost none of it was for COVID. It was for checks for people. It was for child tax credits. It was for unemployment insurance supplements that paid people more not to work than to work. They pushed all this money out in the economy, which produced inflation, supply chain shortage crisis, and a huge labor shortage in the economy. And they didn't prepare for the next wave of the pandemic. Why, when Omicron arrived, did we not have surpluses of all these treatments ready and stockpiled? In Operation Warp Speed, what they did was, instead of developing the vaccines sequentially, where you first develop them, then you test them, and then you scale up manufacturing if they work, the federal government took the risk and funded the manufacturing even before we knew whether they would work. Right? Why have we not done the same thing with the treatments? Why do we not have millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of Merck pills ready to go? Because the Biden administration is more concerned with paying off their left-wing base than they are with taking care of COVID.
And what about the testing? I mean, the testing and the PCR tests, as well as the rapid tests, they want roughly 3 rapid tests to understand if you have it or not. And a PCR test, as you mentioned, that you still have remnants of this virus after you get the virus for 14 days. We'll never get back to work. We'll never get back to school. Never get back to your life. Never go to a basketball game. Never go to a hockey game in your case. So I want you to hear, and never get back to school. So the big story is, I think we're realizing right now that Donald Trump was right. There's too much testing. Number 2 is, I think Donald Trump was right. We got to get the kids back in school. And now the administration, Anthony Fauci, the Secretary of Education under this administration, Cardona, as well as the mayor of New York City, the mayor of Chicago, all say get back to school. But look who's pushing back. Here's Stacey Davis Gates, the vice president of Chicago Teachers Union, cut 14.
I wished our mayor would listen to the Surgeon General and plan for all contingencies, meaning that testing, contact tracing, and vaccination efforts by her administration have been an abject failure. Only 30% of our elementary school students are vaccinated. Only 50% of our high school students are vaccinated. Added to that, we've had the worst debacle with respect to testing that the district has seen in December. So the layers of mitigation that we need to keep our schools open and to keep our students inside of the school buildings have not happened here in Chicago.
So she's saying they haven't happened. Go ahead. You're a witness, and I'll tell you what I think.
Well, here's the thing. One, teachers' unions only care about grown-ups, not children. That's just a fact, right? And they don't even care about most of the grown-ups. They care about their money, right? So if you go to like a state like Wisconsin where Scott Walker did collective bargaining reform, and the teachers' unions, after he passed Act 10, all they can do is negotiate salary, nothing else. Right, and they can't collect dues automatically from your paycheck. You know how many teachers actually ended up paying to stay in the union? About 10%. So 90% of the teachers in Wisconsin didn't even want to be in the union. So this is not a problem with teachers. This is part of a problem of a teachers union cabal. It's a for-profit operation. It's all about the union leaders, and they don't care about children, and they don't even care about teachers. And they are hurt. The fact is, children are not at risk. Healthy children, unless you've got some kind of a comorbidity of some kind, you are not at risk from COVID, whether you're vaccinated or not, in any serious life risk. And they are more at risk from being kept out of schools, from depression, from drug use, from all the side effects that we have. We won't know for years the impact of these school closures on our children. But one thing we will know is that it's disproportionately affecting Black and Latino and minority children and poor children. And those kids are going to have lifetime learning losses, which will lead to lifetime income losses because of these shutdowns. Right. And it is absolutely criminal to keep these kids out of school because a bunch of teachers, union officials, are trying to care more about grown-ups than they do about kids.
Mark, to tell you the truth, you speak more eloquently and more consistently on this than any Republican. We're the Republicans pushing on this. Now that Trump's not in power, they kind of sit back. And I'm wondering, why are they not leading the charge there? Just because you're in the minority doesn't mean you can't make a difference or just wait for 2022. We can't afford that. They need a pressure also for their own self-interest. If you go to bat for urban kids and you provide those numbers and you sit there in the inner city and you put your stack table up or your podium up right on 168th Street in Manhattan or Washington, D.C., which is about 5 miles from mostly Black area, and you say these are the kids that are being hurt in front of those schools, believe me, the Black community will be affected. If you looked at the Virginia numbers, Black men voted more for Youngkin than Trump, and it went up a higher percentage than just about anywhere else in the last election, and they got more of the Black vote from before. And it's legitimate. It's not pandering.
This is the big problem that the Democrats have, which is that they haven't learned the lesson of the last election that you just talked about. And it's not just it wasn't in Virginia. They almost lost in New Jersey, which is not a purple state. It is a deep blue state, and they barely even lost. The parents are what started this whole school board mom movement, or school board parents going to the school boards, was that the parents were at home stuck, and they were finally listening to what was happening in their kids' classes, and they instead of dropping them off at school and then asking them at the end of the day, they were sick and tired of the school closures. They were sick and tired of the indoctrination of their children with left-wing ideologies, and they went to the school boards and demanded change. And the Democrats' response is, we're going to close schools again. That's the teachers' union response. Be my guest. You're going to see Virginia on a national scale in November 2022 if you do that.
They get the right candidates. Here's Mayor Eric Adams, the new mayor of New York City. Cut 11.
We are going to keep our schools open. In the school, less than 1% of children are infected. At home, over 15%. So I say to that parent, bring your child to school.
Come on.
Amen.
That's it. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. That's survival, too, by the way.
That's the future of the Democratic Party if they're not stupid. I mean, the Democratic Party should be listening to Eric Adams, because this is a guy who has figured out how to run and how to be he's a progressive on lots of things, but he wants to keep the schools open. He wants to crack down on crime. He's not insane. Like he's figured out what the rest of the Democratic Party hasn't. So, listen to Eric Adams and follow him instead of following AOC and all these progressive nut jobs.
Well, a couple of things. Lastly, real quick, I want you to hear what Dr. Scott Gottlieb from CBS said about masks.
Cloth masks aren't going to provide a lot of protection. That's the bottom line. This is an airborne illness. We now understand that. And a cloth mask is not going to protect you from a virus that spreads through airborne transmission. It could protect better through droplet transmission, something like the flu, but not something like this coronavirus.
So, sadly, one of his solutions was a N95 mask for a third grader. But what's your take on this? Should we ever wear a mask again? I mean, how many? My head is going to explode when I watch that on Sunday.
Well, first of all, I don't think Scott's arguing for N95 masks for third graders. What he's saying is that if you're concerned about COVID, and look, it's a free country, we should all be able to wear masks if we want to, if it makes us comfortable. If not, but if you're going to wear a mask, don't go around thinking you're protecting yourself or anybody with a stupid cloth mask. Wear a real mask. And this should be a free choice, just like vaccination should be a free choice. We're a free country. People should have the freedom to choose, and this is what Scott does provide, which the CDC doesn't, is actual information about what works and what doesn't work. Right? People should have. This is the biggest problem we have with our public health officials right now, is that they've lost all credibility. It's like, remember when we had after the 9/11 attacks, when the terrorists misled our intelligence and infiltrated our country and attacked us, we did a 9/11 commission to figure out what went wrong in the intelligence community. We need a 9/11 style commission to look what happened, what went wrong with the public health officials, because nobody listens to them anymore. I don't listen to the CDC. I don't trust a damn thing the CDC says. And at least Scott is giving proper information to inform people to make their own choices.
True, but most people have cloth masks. Very few people walking around with N95 masks.
Yeah. Well, or a cloth mask is useless. A surgical mask is better. And a N95 mask is the best mask you can have. And so if you're concerned about either transmitting or getting COVID, wear an N95 mask. And if you're comfortable, we have to learn. Look, we make choices about risk every day in our lives, right?
Yep.
When you walk out the house.
Right. Mark Thiessen will not be cliff diving. That's his decision, and I agree. Mark, thanks so much. Back in a moment.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network, download and listen to The Untold Story with Martha McCallum. The host of The Story on Fox News Channel sits down with major newsmakers each week to get their untold story. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Radio that makes you think. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
I wouldn't change a thing about what we recommended to the president. We were defending the United States of America. We were keeping American people safe. Qasem Soleimani was actively engaged in plotting against America. And we took military actions, lawful military action, to make sure that no Americans were killed. It was a good decision. And now we have the responsibility. The American leadership has the responsibility to make sure and keep every American safe against the threat from Iran. And to see President Raisi out there talking about putting President Trump and me on trial, and then if that doesn't work, having us assassinated, is deeply unprecedented and a real responsibility for the leadership team.
Yeah, the leadership of this president. I mean, my goodness, I remember when Bill Clinton was president, they tried to have an assassination attempt on Bush 41. He punished them. He was retired and he lost to Clinton. He punished Iraq, Saddam Hussein at the time. You just say, okay, it's okay to threaten Trump and the Secretary of State, because you know what? They're just trying to get back into a bad deal that couldn't get confirmed out of the Senate. I'm talking about that JCPOA. So that is a little about what's going on. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Mark Brenovich about something that concerns all of you, the mandates for private industry when it comes to this vaccine. A vaccine they're having some trouble with now. I don't know if you've noticed. Don't move.
Breaking news, unique opinions. Hear it all on the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Well, certainly we know that mandates have not worked, and just look at the past several weeks. We had over 500,000 people with positive tests 2 days ago, and then just yesterday, I think we were up to almost 500,000 as well. So the mandates don't work. What we did in the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, bipartisan legislation, is we know that the White House wants to give our military personnel a dishonorable discharge if they're separated because of their refusal to take the vaccine.
So the mandates have not worked, but they've been prevalent and growing. But it's not okay with many people listening to me right now, especially my next guest, Attorney General Mark Brenovich. He's the Attorney General of Arizona, who is sued the Biden administration twice over these COVID-19 vaccine mandates. And the Supreme Court said this is so important. We're in the middle of a pandemic that we're going to have a special session. We could get a verdict this week. They cannot force private businesses with over 100 people to make their employees get vaccines or be fired, I would think. Mark, welcome back.
Thank you, Brian, for having me on again.
So first off, any word?
Well, the cases will be heard this week, and I learned a long time ago never to predict what a federal judge is going to do, but clearly we think the Constitution's on our side because this is an unconstitutional and unprecedented power grab by the Biden administration, and I think that even the most pro-vaccine advocates cannot in good conscience support these mandates because they're illegal, they're immoral, they're unscientific, and quite frankly, they're unbelievable. It is a dangerous precedent. And we actually have 4 lawsuits going on. 2 of them will be heard by the Supreme Court dealing with the OSHA rules, and this is the whole notion that OSHA has the ability to promulgate these rules to private employers with 100 employees or more, which clearly unconstitutional. And then there's also rules dealing with Health and Human Services, trying to mandate that healthcare workers, get the vaccine. We also think that's clearly unconstitutional. And we also, just last week, we got an injunction, a lawsuit that we are in dealing with the Biden administration trying to say that if schools get Head Start funding, that the staff, even the volunteers, the kids have to mask up at 2 years and above. So really, Brian, and you know this, I know you've talked about it, this is a radical power grab, and we, whether you're Democrat or Republican, Independent, Green Party, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, this is a dangerous precedent, and we should all be worried about the left's attempt to concentrate so much power in Washington, D.C.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, it's just power, period. I look at this. So New York probably was the first. They just started mandating, this idiot mayor and governor. They mandate you got to get a vaccination. So immediately 3,000 healthcare workers in the state have been suspended, resigned, or fired without pay, without getting unemployment because they refused to get a vaccination. These are healthcare workers. 34 cops told don't come back, unpaid leave. You have a job. Teachers as well. Albany Medical, for example, they suspended 204 of their 11,000 employees. Mount Sinai, 1% of their entire employee base. And New York Presbyterian, fewer than 250, about 250 members were told don't come back. Northwell, 1,400. So I'm looking at this saying we're in a time in which medical workers we hear are being burnt out and overworked. We get it. They can ill afford to lose people who actually know better than anybody else the risks of the virus, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And this is what's so heartbreaking. And, I spent much of my career as a prosecutor. I used to prosecute gangs. I've worked closely with law enforcement. And, in fact, the Phoenix Police Union and the fire departments here joined our lawsuit because I challenged the Biden administration, regarding his ability to try to mandate this vaccine. First lawsuit was filed by me here in Arizona, and they joined us. And the Biden administration, they sent their folks out from DOJ, from, the SWAM, to argue the case. And they literally they argued. They said, well, there's no harm to anybody because the worst thing that happens, either you get the vaccine or you lose your job. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, my goodness, this is the arrogance of the left. They think that people losing their jobs, losing their health care, losing their benefits, jeopardizing their retirements is not a consequences. It just shows you how out of touch they are and how much power they want D.C. and the bureaucrats to have. And I sit there and I say to myself, you think about all these first responders, all these healthcare workers, whether you're pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, whatever. I'm pro-Constitution. That's what I am. Yep. And the notion that folks that for the last 18 months jeopardized and sacrificed so much, working in dangerous conditions, now they're going to start losing their jobs and their livelihood and their benefits and their health insurance. It is absolutely despicable. It is unconscionable. Like I said, what they are doing is illegal, immoral, unscientific, and unconscionable.
So tell me how this does. I don't have a law degree, Mark. Did you guys do this in written form, and are they going to debate your written briefs, or is someone arguing this case?
Yes. Well, there's a couple of cases that are active right now, and so yes, you file a lawsuit, and then a federal judge, usually a district judge, will make a decision, and then it goes up to the Court of Appeals. And you may recall what happened with the OSHA mandates. This is the one where we challenged the vaccine mandates on private companies with 100 or more employees. That there was numerous lawsuits filed. So me and some of my other Republican colleagues, folks like Jeff Landry in Louisiana and Kilmeade in Missouri. So we all filed lawsuits, and then they were consolidated at the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that's one of the cases Supreme Court's hearing. And then the other one, the CMS/HHS mandate dealing with the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers, that was originally filed in the Western District of Louisiana, and we were part of that lawsuit, and that is also will be argued. So there's a bunch of briefing, a bunch of legal, there's paper, but then literally there will be an oral argument on January 7th in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on both of those cases. Meanwhile, and I'm sorry, there's way too much probably detailed lawyer stuff, but the dealing with the Head Start lawsuit and whether the Biden administration can mandate staff and volunteers to be required to wear masks, that a judge in Louisiana said that was unconstitutional, and I'm sure the Biden administration is going to appeal that, and we'll see that work its way up in the courts. And we have a lawsuit right here dealing with, we challenged the Biden administration's attempts to require vaccines for all federal workers. So there's multiple lawsuits going on, but I'm pretty sure that the Supreme Court will give us a lot of guidance as to what the federal government can and can't do when it comes to the vaccine based on what happens on January 7th. And the fact that they were willing to take these cases, take them so quickly, and schedule them for oral argument so fast, I think is an indication that the court appreciates how dubious what the Biden administration, what they are doing is, and how important it is to create some certainty.
Right. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I've said this before, and that, at the end of the day, and I know you appreciate this, is that the government doesn't get to be our nanny, and it surely doesn't get to be our doctor. And I don't know at what point in this country where, even the left used to talk about, question authority and, don't give all this power to D.C. and, our healthcare records and information's our own information. And now everyone thinks that it's okay to ask everyone about their healthcare records, their health status. There's no dignity or privacy anymore in our own medical decisions. It is crazy, and I just think that Lyndon Johnson used to say that if you let a bully in your front yard, the next day he's on your porch, and the day after that he's shacking up with your wife. And LBJ used a different term for shacking up, if you know what I mean. This is a PG show, but the point is that if you allow the federal government to do this, to have this kind of authority, it means that it's that they have all this unquestioned power, and this is what the left wants. They want.
Mark, we're seeing it again. And here's the thing. They're doing it now with the booster shot. And we know in Israel they're doing 4 shots. How soon till 4 shots? And I want you to hear what Dr. Oz said. Now they're telling 12 to 15-year-olds, you got to go get a booster. Yeah. They're telling my college, my 2 girls in college, they can't go back to campus without a booster shot. Please tell me the study that says the booster shot's even helping. We got a Secretary of Defense now in quarantine with a booster and 2 shots, and we're walking around with a face shield. Here's Dr. Oz. By the way, a legitimate doctor, cut 8.
Authorizing boosters for kids, 12 to 15. There's no panel involved like they're supposed to. Scientific advisors are supposed to assess whether, for example, there's a concern about myocarditis, which is what held us back the first time. But I actually take it a step back. I think boosters are the wrong challenge for America. We need to focus on adults who need medications. And here's what I do. Simple. I'm a doctor. I review the data. One size does not fit all when you have a 1,000-fold difference between the incidence of infection and complications in older people versus young kids. We have to be brave enough as conservatives, as Republicans, as Americans, to talk openly about this, to say what we're seeing with our own eyes, to call it like it is. This is inconsistency. It's frustrating the voters in Pennsylvania. Americans all over the country are feeling it. The constantly changing rule book has got to stop.
So the one-size-fits-all by a politician trumps doctors? That's why how important your lawsuit is. There's nothing to do with your party affiliation. You're like fighting for the 4th shot, the 5th shot. Now, if we don't get one annually, our vaccination's going to expire. That's not a vaccine.
Yeah, and you know what the funny thing? It's not funny, Brian, but I go out and I talk to people and I don't use notes. I call it I don't use a set list. And I was talking to some folks and someone cut something I said out of context. I basically said, look, if you can still get COVID and you can still spread it, what's the point? And then, you have people on TV, local TV, who said, oh, my God, Bertovich wants to get people killed. And my poor mom who, fled communism, lived through World War II, trying to watch The Wheel of Fortune and sees this teaser are on the news that Brnovich wants to get people killed, and it's so patently ridiculous because this is not just about an experimental vaccine/treatment. It's about how much our individual liberties matter and how many of those the Biden administration will trample in the process. And that's why we are fighting these lawsuits. It's not anti-science. It is pro-Constitution. And as you know, and you pointed this out on your show, the Biden administration has been all over the map. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, get shots. If you get a shot, you're going to, be okay. You can go outside. We're not going to mandate it. They've been all over the place. The only consistency has been their inconsistency, and that's why I think so many people are so apprehensive. And at the end of the day, I wish the left and the Biden administration people would read the New York Times, because even the New York Times, their favorite liberal paper of choice, had an article a couple of weeks ago that Pfizer's got some new treatment that's supposedly 90% effective. And I know last time I was on a show and I talked about antibodies. Why aren't we focusing on antibodies? I had several doctors here in Arizona reach out to me saying, oh my goodness, I'm glad someone's finally talking about this, because you talk about mitigation strategies. Why isn't anyone focusing on, well, wait a minute, there are people out there we know that have had COVID, they're asymptomatic. They have antibodies. They actually have better protection than people that got the booster. So why aren't we looking at people and whether they have antibodies and whether there's other mitigation strategies we can use, including treatments, instead of going right away to vaccines that, apparently, you can still get it and give it.
I hear you. And Mark Brnovich, Attorney General of Arizona. Listen, I tell you, I thought to myself, I know Arizona, I don't live there, but I've been there. I thought to myself that Mark Kelly's probably going to do a good job, because he's a military guy and he understands the danger of the border. And he also, he is a Democrat. I get it. And John McCain would have done a better job. I understand it. But I just said to myself, he's probably going to be a moderate because he wants to get reelected. He wants to get elected. So get a full 6 years. But he's been invisible. It's Kristen Sinema who's done all the hard laboring. In fact, it was Tim Scott who had to defend her in an airport. You would think that Mark Kelly would appear with her and say, back off, because we don't agree on this. You cannot physically follow her into the bathroom. You cannot threaten her when she walks down the hall. Instead, he's been invisible. He has not stood up what I thought were the people of Arizona, which at the best was a purple state that used to be a red state. What made him vulnerable enough for you to want to jump in?
Well, Brian, I grew up here in Arizona, and I think one of the things that sometimes people don't understand about Arizona is we have this strong independent streak, kind of that cowboy mentality of, self-reliance.
You were territory.
Individual ruggedism. Yeah, and I think that even people that weren't born here understand it because they have either friends or, parents or grandparents that understand that Western Barry Goldwater spirit and that mentality of self-reliance, a healthy distrust of the federal government, central authority. And someone like Mark Kelly or someone, from California that moves here, or Kelly from New Jersey, they don't get that. And they don't understand that we have a healthy distrust of, Washington. We don't want to socialize the economy and nationalize our elections. We don't have faith in those institutions back east. And so he never got that. And I think because he never, maybe didn't grow up here, spend enough time here, right, he doesn't understand how important the border is, because we know that even going back to what we were just talking about in the vaccine, you can't have any real conversation about the vaccine until you talk about the border, because we know that the Biden administration even now is talking about test kits and more masks, and yet they're letting people they let people come into the country unvaccinated and then essentially give them free airfare to go all throughout the country. So
Senator in Pennsylvania and Florida and Texas. It's unbelievable.
Chain's only as good as its weakest link. And so you get we haven't even, you look at what's going on with fentanyl. And I said, I was a gang prosecutor, as a federal prosecutor. We have never seen it this bad in law enforcement. I mean, literally 9 million just in Arizona fentanyl pills seized last year. That's enough to kill our entire state. I mean, 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. And there's 100,000 people died of fentanyl opioid-related deaths this last year in America. Think about this, Brian. That's like 3 times the amount of people who were killed during
Mark,
the Korean
I know.
War.
Yeah, we've been covering it. But you have a lot to do. Listen, you have it's a consequential state, and it's a seat that could turn the Senate. Right now, you're leading the pack that consists of McGuire, as Lemon and Blake Masters. Right now, you have the most of the registered voters. So best of luck, Mark. I know you're going to be fired up and you're going to know the issues, and I hope you win this lawsuit, not for you or the party, but for the country. Mark Brenovich, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. It's all about the principles. Thank you.
Absolutely. Back in a moment.
Newsmakers and newsbreakers. Hear it first, only on the Brian Kilmeade Show. The fastest 3 hours in radio. You're with Brian Kilmeade.
Let me just say that to being open to a rules change that would create a nuclear option, it's very, very difficult. So it's a heavy lift. And the reason I say it's a heavy lift is that once you change a rule or you have a carve out, and I've always said this, anytime there's a carve out, you eat the whole turkey. There's nothing left because it comes back and forth. So you want things that will be sustainable. That's what you're looking for.
He also went on to say when it comes to election reform, that is Joe Manchin moments ago. In fact, he's still speaking right now. Moments ago, dealing with the hottest issues of the day, and that's the Democratic agenda. It's all in his hands, Kristen Sinema and any other sensible Democrat. Are you going to blow up the filibuster? Are you going to nationalize elections? Are you going to have a carve-out of the nationalized elections in order to nationalize an election? So you're going to have a carve-out of the filibuster in order to do that. He's saying it'll be a very heavy lift to do that. He'd have to have Republican buy-in, which means there'll be zero Republican buy-in. Here's what he's responding to. Chuck Schumer yesterday, cut 18.
Because if we don't change the rules, the Republicans will block this and our democracy could be at risk and even wither in real ways.
That he's saying that we have to blow up the filibuster. He's saying we're not going to do that. Sinema said we're not going to do that. So what changed? I mean, is this like just the desperate railings of something you expect from the squad? Or is he actually a leader? Is Chuck Schumer actually a leader? We're going to have a vote on this. Good luck. Have a vote on this. But what's going to change? Nothing's going to change. And that's why you watch Joe Biden's mandates, I hope, blow up. If you do want to make the most of your next year and make something of 3 years, you got to do what Bill Clinton did. You got to start being a moderate. You know, Joe Manchin would actually have success as a president right now because there's a lot of Republicans who see him as an honest broker because he's done exactly what he said he's going to do. And there's a lot of Republicans who want to get things done. You might not like the infrastructure deal, but it's getting things done. You know, and we want people to have faith in elections. We don't want to nationalize them, but there's some fundamental things they could probably agree on to pass. But they would trust Joe Manchin. They don't trust Joe Biden, and they certainly don't trust Chuck Schumer. So listen, follow me on Rumble now. I started yesterday, and this new Getter, this new Trump site, I'm on social media, so check it out. Follow me.